Hello everyone, welcome to my tutorial for the crochet top Elaine. For this tutorial, I'll be making a size medium. Moving on to the body, begin with a slip knot. Chain 70 for the foundation chain. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Continue to 70 chains. I now have 70 chains, round 1. Into the 4th chain from the hook, double crochet. So it's yarn over into the 4th chain, insert your hook, pick up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on the hook. Then work double crochets all through the round. I've completed rounds 1 and 2 working double crochets. At the end of round 1, I chained 3, turned and continued with double crochets to complete round 2. Moving on to round 3, it's chain 3 and turn. Remember, chain 3 counts as a stitch, so do not work a stitch into the same stitch that the chain 3 comes out of. Into the next stitch, work a double crochet. Then it's skip 1 stitch and into the next stitch, work a double crochet followed by a chain 1 and a double crochet, all into that same stitch. Then it's skip 2 stitches and into that 3rd stitch after the skip 2 stitches, work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, all into that same stitch. Again, I'll skip 2 stitches and into that 3rd stitch, work a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, follow the pattern to the end. I'm at the end of round 3 with 2 stitches and the turning chain to go. So I'll skip the 1 stitch and into the next stitch, work a double crochet. Also into that turning chain, work a double crochet. Moving on to round 4, it's chain 3, 1, 2, 3 and turn. Here I'll work double crochets all through the round. So into the next double crochet, I'll work a double crochet, and into every double crochet, I'll work a double crochet. Into every chain 1 space, I'll work a double crochet. Chain 1 space, double crochet, chain 1 space, continue working double crochets all through the round. I've completed rounds 4 and 5. Round 5, I chain 3, turned and worked double crochets all across. At every few rounds, make sure that your stitch count is correct. Remember always to work that last stitch into the turning chain. Moving on to round 6, it's chain 3 and turn. Work a double crochet into the next stitch. Then it's skip 1 stitch and into the next stitch, work a puff stitch. So it's yarn over insert your hook into the stitch and pull up a loop. Pull up the loop long, yarn over again, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull up a loop. I've done that 4 times, and yarn over, go through all the loops and secure. So then it's chain 1 and another puff stitch. The 4th one and secure it. Then it's skip 2 stitches, and into that next stitch a puff stitch, secure it, chain 1 and another puff stitch. And 4. Secure it. Skip 2 and into the next stitch a puff stitch, chain 1, puff stitch. Secure it, chain 1 and another puff stitch. Continue with skip 2, puff stitch, chain 1, puff stitch into 1 stitch, skip 2, puff stitch, chain 1, puff stitch into 1 stitch. I'm at the end of round 6 with 2 stitches and the turning chain to go. So it's skip 1 stitch, into the next stitch work a double crochet, and into that turning chain work a double crochet. Round 7, chain 3 and turn, work a double crochet into the previous round's double crochet. Here we'll work double crochets all through the round. If you look at the top of the puff stitch, you'll see a stitch. Into that stitch work a double crochet, then it's a double crochet into the chain 1 space and a double crochet into the top of the next puff stitch. Continue working double crochets all through the round. Make sure that you're working double crochets above the puff stitches and into the chain 1 spaces, and not in between the sets of puff stitches. I've completed round 7 to round 24 by repeating round 1 to round 6. I've completed round 25 to round 29 by repeating round 1 to round 5. For round 30, we'll form the neckline. I chained 3 and repeated round 6, working 5 sets of puff stitches. The 5 sets of puff stitches used 16 stitches. I then counted 16 stitches from the end of the round and marked the 17th stitch with a stitch marker. That leaves me with 35 stitches from the last puff stitch to the stitch marker. After the 5th puff stitch, chain 35 loose chains. I've chained 35 loose chains. I'll now continue by working a puff stitch into the stitch just after the stitch marker. And secure. I then follow the pattern by repeating round 6 to the end. Moving on to round 31, it's chain 4, 2, 3, 4 and turn. Chain 4 counts as 1 double crochet and chain 1. Skip the next double crochet and into the puff stitch work a double crochet. Then it's chain 1, skip the chain 1 space and into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch and into the chain 1 space work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch and into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Then it's chain 1, skip the chain 1 space and into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Then it's chain 1, skip the puff stitch and into the chain 1 space work a double crochet. Then it's chain 1, skip the puff stitch and into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Then it's chain 1, skip the chain 1 space and into the last puff stitch work a double crochet. Continue working double crochets into all the chains. I've completed the double crochets along the neckline. I work the last double crochet into the puff stitch. Then it's chain 1, skip the chain 1 space and into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch into the chain 1 space work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the chain 1 space into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch into the chain 1 space work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch into the following puff stitch work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the chain 1 space into the next puff stitch work a double crochet. Chain 1, skip the double crochet and into the turning chain, chain 3 work a double crochet. Moving on to round 32, it's chain 3 and turn. Here I'll work double crochets all through the round. So into every chain 1 space you'll work a double crochet, and into every double crochet of the previous round work a double crochet. Continue to the end of the round. I've completed round 32, working double crochets all across. I've completed rounds 33 to rounds 66 by repeating round 32. You'll notice that I've worked more rounds for the back than I did for the front, and that's because when I fold it in half, I need to lower the neckline at the front. So if I fold it in half, it matches up at the bottom. I then fastened off and cut off the excess yarn. With the piece folded in half, mark off the armholes measuring from the shoulder fold. That would be 8 inches or 20 centimeters. Do the same on the other side, marking both the front and the back with stitch markers. Seam up the sides beginning from the bottom of the piece to the stitch markers. Continue to the stitch marker. Remember, you're working with the right sides facing in. I've seamed up the sides, removed the stitch markers, and turned the piece facing right side out. Attach the yarn to the center back. I've made a slip knot on the yarn. Pull that through the stitch. Then it's chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1. Then it's skip 1 stitch into the next stitch, work a double crochet, chain 1, skip 1 stitch into the next stitch, work a double crochet, chain 1, skip a stitch into the next stitch, work a double crochet. Continue with the pattern to the end of the round. I'm at the end of round 67 with 1 stitch to go, so it's chain 1 and slip stitch into the chain 3 from the chain 4. Round 68, chain 3. Here we'll work double crochets all through the round, so in every chain 1 space work a double crochet, and into every double crochet of the previous round work a double crochet. I've completed round 68 by slip stitching into the chain 3 from the start of the round. Round 69, chain 3. Here we'll work double crochets all across, but into every 3rd stitch we'll work an increase. So that's the first double crochet, the second double crochet, and into the 3rd stitch an increase. To work an increase, it's 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. Continue working increases into every 3rd stitch. Round 70, chain 3. Here I'll work double crochets all through the round. I'll work an increase into every 4th stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, and into the 4th stitch an increase. That's 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. Continue working double crochets and into every 4th stitch an increase. Round 71, chain 3. Here I'll work double crochets all across, and into every 5th stitch I'll work an increase. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and into the 5th stitch work 2 double crochets. Continue working double crochets and an increase in every 5th stitch. I've completed round 72 to round 76 by working double crochets with no increases. Moving on to the frill at the sleeves, attach yarn to the underarm. Here for round 1, I'll single crochet all through the round. Single crochet evenly throughout. Continue to complete the round. I've completed round 1. At this point, I've placed 2 stitch markers on either side of the underarm. It's placed about 2 inches or 5 centimeters away from the underarm. Moving on to round 2, it's chain 1. Here I'll single crochet to the first stitch marker. Then work double crochets to the next stitch marker. Continue to the next stitch marker. At the second stitch marker, continue working single crochets to the end. I've slip stitched to join and I've chained 1. Round 3, I'll work single crochets to the stitch marker. Thereafter, at the double crochets, I'll work 2 double crochets into each stitch. At the double crochet, work 2 double crochets into each stitch. Continue working 2 double crochets into each stitch until you get to the second stitch marker. At the second stitch marker, continue working single crochets to the end of the round. I've completed rounds 4 and 5. For round 4, I single crocheted to the first stitch marker. I then worked double crochets, and into every second stitch I worked an increase. That's 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. For round 5, I single crocheted to the first stitch marker, and I worked an increase into every 3rd stitch. So in every 3rd stitch, I worked 2 double crochets. Again, at the end, I single crocheted from the second stitch marker to the end. All that's left to do is to weave in the ends and to form the cords for the frill at the sleeves and at the waist. Forming the cord does use up quite a bit of yarn, so form a slip knot leaving a long tail. Insert the hook into the slip knot. Then it's bring the yarn, the tail end of the yarn, over the hook, and while holding the little point formed by the slip knot, yarn over and pull the yarn through both the loops on the hook. So again, take the yarn over, the tail end over the hook, and yarn over, pull through both. The tail end of the yarn over the hook. Continue doing this until you have a long enough cord. I've completed the cords, 4 of them, 2 shorter ones for the frill at the shoulder and 2 longer ones for the waistline. I've weaved in the 2 longer cords at the frill at the waistline. I've weaved in 1 at the back and 1 through the front. So at the sides they meet. At the shoulder fold, to weave in the cord, fold the cord in half and get in the first side into the chain 1 space. Then it's weave both into the chain 1 spaces. And then separate the 2 and weave the 1 into the last chain 1 space. Do the same at the other shoulder fold. Remember, you're weaving in the cords into the chain 1 spaces.